The Prime Minister has nearly finished her first official trip to Europe after a week meeting foreign leaders and attending the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in London. But she's come in for some criticism back home over her comments on the US-led strike against Syria last weekend. Europe correspondent Joy Reid asked her whether she backed our traditional allies and their actions.
Yes, of course, what we would have favoured was an approach via the United Nations. New Zealand has always favoured a multilateral approach, but look, given the veto power was used at the Security Council by Russia, which is something we've strongly condemned, there was very little option in terms of standing up and giving a response to the use of chemical weapons, which is abhorrent and is a breach of international law. So we accept the decision made by the US, by the UK and by France, but now we're calling for a return back to the UN, which actually the likes of France and others absolutely agree with.
Our allies have been a lot stronger in their wording. Why is it that we haven't gone to that level?
The reason that we have used slightly different language is because we don't want to give up on that international infrastructure. We don't want to see a world where there is an acceptance that the UN isn't the place where we navigate these issues, and because ultimately for the reconstruction of Syria we will need to try and build a much wider interest group for that long-term project. But again, we also want to uphold international law, and the way to do that is through those institutions, which was why we'll always campaign against the use of veto powers in the Security Council.
What do you make of Robert Fisk's doubts about whether a chemical attack even occurred in Syria?
Well, this has been one of the problems. We've seen that those international agencies, which ultimately we would want to be in there assessing what has happened, have had trouble accessing some of those areas, and there have been reasons why. We've called on the Syrian government and Russia as an ally to ensure the access of those independent investigators to get in there and make that assessment. Certainly though, from the likes of France, there have been public reports that have produced sufficient evidence to suggest that that is what has happened in Syria.
Steve Johnson, the producer of this programme, chatted to veteran Middle East correspondent Robert Fisk, who also writes for The Independent in the UK. And here's what Robert had to say to Steve.
Look, I've just been in the town of Douma, where the video of people apparently suffering from gas poisoning was what originally produced these strikes. And the real question is whether in fact gas attacks, and even if there were, it's not something that's unusual, since gas was used to kill thousands of Iranian soldiers and civilians during the war of 1980-88. But in fact, what I did manage to find today, as I went around the town of Douma, which of course now is in the hands of the government as opposed to the various Islamist militias, is that some considerable doubt in my mind about what actually happened there. The infamous gas attack, which provoked Trump and Theresa May and Macron to bomb 3 separate targets in Syria at the weekend. I found the clinic where the film of the children stopping at the mouth and having water thrown at them was made. But the senior hospital doctor, who actually spoke very good English, who was there, told me that the video is real. The video is 100% authentic. But they were not suffering from gas poisoning. They were suffering from panic and hypoxia, because of the amount of dust in the tunnels in which they live. And that night there was a lot of shelling by the Syrian army and by the Russian Air Force. And it produced a huge amount of dust and debris in the streets, and many people were finding it difficult to breathe. And when they reached the clinic, according to the doctor, someone shouted gas, and they panicked. But he did confirm that the videotape, was indeed taken in the clinic there, the same clinic that I actually interviewed him in. So that raises the question again of just, was it in fact a gas attack? War has a habit, and you'll remember since of that destruction in Iraq, of not quite producing the truth first time round. Now, the Russians have said, of course, that there wasn't gas used. The Syrians, well, they would say that, wouldn't they? But the doctor in question whom I interviewed, and it really was the same clinic, I could recognise it, he was at his home in a basement 300 metres away on that night. And the doctors who were there on the night when the video was taken are in fact in the city of Damascus, where I've just arrived, giving evidence to a chemical warfare commission. And we don't know at the moment what they're saying, although he told me they'll say exactly what he told me. He sounded a very credible man, I should point out. And after talking to perhaps 20, 25 people in the whole area of where the gas was supposed to be used, he couldn't find anyone who had any record of it. So that's what I can tell you. I'm the first journalist to find that clinic since the videotape was taken, which was taken anyway, as you know, by a medical group called the White Helmet. I tried to see the White Helmet, but I was told by people in the hospital that they had in fact left on the buses that the Syrian government and the Russian army had arranged for Islamist fighters to be taken to Idlib. In other words, the White Helmets, which were partly funded by the British Foreign Office, appear to have chosen to leave on buses alongside Islamist fighters. Now, what that tells you, I'm not sure. I literally only just got back. I'm going to have to write my story up. But that's what I learned so far. I did go into huge underground tunnels and prisons, which the Islamist groups had done. In fact, they actually got prisoners with pickaxes that hack away at the walls. Some of these tunnels are 3 stories deep, and you can drive cars through them. It was quite an extraordinary experience to witness it today.
Robert, it was reported that 40 people were killed in this alleged chemical gas attack. Did you hear anything about victims?
43 is the figure, wasn't it? No, I could not discover where there was a graveyard even. I was not being shadowed by policemen or soldiers or minders. I was free to move around. I did pick up rumours from several people that a mass grave had been found containing hostages who had been murdered by the group, the various armed groups who were holding Duma. But I did not find anyone who knew or had anyone who had died among the 43 whom we heard reported on.
Having gone to Duma, Robert, how do you feel about people like Theresa May, Emmanuel Macron and Donald Trump taking military action on the assumption that these deaths were caused by a chemical gas attack by the Assad government?
Well, good point. I'm asking myself that in the story, which I'm going to have to write. I think the point is that I don't believe, frankly, that what Trump and May and Macron did had much to do with. I think it was generally try and help Trump out of the pornographic problems in the United States. It was to help May out of a Brexit ditch. It was probably to help Macron secure for France more arms deals with Saudi Arabia.